I tend to move, and I do generally project pretty well, but I sort of move naturally, so if you can't hear me, just pop your hand at the back. I don't do well standing behind. I feel like many university lecturers probably felt. I wanted to just touch on some of the points made before in the presentation, which were really insightful. It's a bit off topic, but somewhat related. I think one of the things as a HR practitioner we need to start thinking about is we often think about succession planning, and we're talking about building up leaders so they can step in when people are transitioning out of the workplace. What we don't do is think about transition planning. So when we think about the older population, it's so important that, instead of focusing on how we're going to fill that corporate knowledge when they go, is establishing both a transition plan and a succession plan, because I think, just talking to your points around older workers and helping them, whether it's retraining or building up their technical capabilities, at the same time, from a reverse mentoring perspective, we can gain from them that corporate knowledge as they transition out and the sort of succession plan moves forward. And that was just one of the thoughts that I sort of had in your presentation. And I want to touch on, again, one of your other topics as well, but I'll keep progressing. So today, I wanted to thank Comcare for having me and for you all attending. I have a bit of a diverse background, and one of those roles, or many of the roles, but more formally was at Fair Work Ombudsman, where I learnt a lot around conflict resolution. But it's also sort of my bread and butter just generally on a day-to-day basis. Good management of workplace concerns and conflict, and I use conflict a bit lightly. It sounds a bit more severe than it really is, but it's just where you have a difference of opinion. So when we manage that well, we can prevent minor workplace issues from escalating into more serious matters. And at Defence Housing Australia, back in 2014, so within about the first 6 months of my starting there, we actually identified through consultation and really close data examination that many of our long-tail return to work and sort of workers' compensation claims actually sort of stemmed from workplace issues left unresolved. And we were starting to see this sort of increasing costs and the negative impacts on the organisation and our people. In particular, things like staff engagement results weren't looking great. There was a lot of, there wasn't any collaboration or cross-pollination of ideas. Each of the business units tended to act like they were their own separate business enterprise. So when I started, and it's been quite a journey, I want to emphasise that point, I came in and I really wanted to be committed to building and maintaining a very positive work environment in which employees can work collaboratively together. And in so doing, we have to respect that conflict or disputes or disagreements or differences of opinion are just part and parcel of working collaboratively and actually designing innovative solutions. So this afternoon I want to provide you some insights that I hope you'll be able to take back to the workplace. Of course, I can't provide you all the finer details. 20 minutes isn't particularly long, and I do tend to wrap it on. But what I do want to be able to take back is the risk climate that we saw that led to one of many initiatives, this is, in the sort of psychosocial wellbeing space. I want to touch on that strategy because it was the foundation that we absolutely needed to be able to get there. Briefly touch on the model. It's a model that's been designed for us, but it's sort of built upon many models, in particular internationally. And about the capability we had to build both organisationally and from a people perspective in order to actually deliver that change. And of course, just some quick sort of organisational change take-home points around what are the benefits. So what can you use back in your workplace to drive that? Now, if you were here a couple of years ago, there was quite a strong focus on psychosocial risks at the conference. And that was about roughly the same time, I guess, we finally got our skates on as an organisation. There's been increasing recognition in Australia, I think, over the last 20 years, and in particular, and even internationally, of the urgent need to be able to address the workplace factors that actually contribute to our psychological wellbeing in the workplace. Work-related stress represents a really large cost for the economy and for the worker, and more broadly, it's actually regarded as an important social determinant of health. And back in 1996, they predicted that by 2020, stress-related illnesses such as depression and cardiovascular disease were forecast to be the leading cause of the global disease burden. So we're less than 2 years away from that prediction, and I don't think anyone would disagree that we were actually pretty much bang on that prediction. So the increased need to project worker psychological wellbeing has arisen due to the potential negative impacts of the workplace risks that contribute. So the negative impacts are things like the increased rate of psychological illness, of course. That can actually have an onflow or, may not actually be related to just physical health problems manifesting as well. You've got declines in productivity due to work stress, presenteeism, absenteeism, poor worker health, rising costs associated with work-related injuries and compensation claims. But I do want to sort of park the liability focus that lots of people tend to get stuck in. I want to take a bit more of a people focus to the problem. So what are the aspects of the workplace design that can actually impact on that? So fatigue, overwork, and I think we've heard today the concept, like with digital technology emerging, people are working on public transport, like our work days are not the sort of 9 to 5 work days anymore, and I even find myself at night, if I'm suffering from insomnia, I jump online and I just pay a few bills, invoices for work, or I play around with my budget. So we're all working slightly longer and we can burn out quite easily. Of course, there's bullying and allegations of bullying, which I'll touch on, occupational violence, exposure to traumatic events, occupational stress, and last but not least, workplace conflict. Now, for DHA, we, back in 2016, launched our psychosocial wellbeing strategy, which had to look at all of these factors, all of these things, and we finally got to about 18 months ago where we could actually start to think about the workplace conflict. But before I do, I just wanted to touch on the climate that drove this change for us. So I started in DHA late in 2013, and I think I got the Comcare premium bill. I thought, oh, okay, I didn't know how much to expect it to have been, but what I did do is have a look at the years previous. So I paid it, what did I pay it? 2014-15 at the end there was the bill I got. I went, okay, that's okay. I've done a lot of work for self-insurance. That sounds about right. But then when I looked at the years before that, I went, wow, God, that's like 300% increase in less than 5 years. So I started looking at the data of the claims that sort of led to that. And basically, 8% of our total number of claims were related to mental stress or psychological type stresses. And they amounted to 70% of the total kind of claims costs. So we had claims and a really small you can probably, it's not on this graph, it's on the next one, but really small numbers. And they, at the time, were tracking at about 1 million with a projected cost of 3 million, which is monstrous. And that's just from a claims perspective. That doesn't take into account the early intervention, return to work kind of, external rehab provider costs, any legal advice. That's just the claim costs that sort of get paid by Comcare. So that's the graph that I pulled for the decade prior to sort of understand that. And what you can see there with the mental stress one is the low claim numbers, which are the bar graph, but the costs is kind of disproportionate with that. And I suspect if you all go back and look at your claims history, you'll possibly see quite a similar pattern because the scheme, we compared it with the scheme overall and it was quite similar. So I'm probably not preaching too far on this one. And then we looked at our employee assistance program. This was data back from October 2014 to September 2015. And what we saw was that of the work-related interpersonal issues that were presenting to our EAP provider, 80% involved the supervisor and manager and 20% involved co-workers. Now, that's all the information we have. We don't necessarily have much more than that. So we're starting to see some trends. So when we started to sort of pull this data together and even sort of talk to the business, and we're regionally dispersed, and each sort of region tends to operate like its own business, and so it's great going to talk to them because they've all got very different perspectives. But we basically painted a picture of this sort of what causes psychological decline. So I want to start with management capability, and this causes lots of problems in a workplace, trust me, but it was one of the ones that we saw. Managers tend to rise to their sort of role because it's subject matter expertise, not because of their sort of, core competencies. And what we saw is we would have cases where a new manager would come in and perhaps actually start managing, actually having a performance development, program or whatever we call them, and managing their workers to that. Of course, those workers had been there. People don't tend to leave DHA either. They'd been there 20 years and they'd had manager X before who really just gave them their performance bonus every year, didn't really manage per se. So the perception there was, I'm getting performance managed, this person's sort of bullying or harassing me. So that's one such example that we started to see, and we unpacked this information from independent medical examinations. They are fantastic reads for data because you've got data that's reported from your incidents and injury sort of data, but then you've got this sort of data that sits behind, and that's what comes out in the IME. reports, and that's where we got a lot of this background from. Of course, another, dovetailing into management capabilities, performance management, as I alluded to before. We had a bit of a workplace culture. Whilst we sort of had staff engagement survey results tell us things that we probably well knew, it was more the experiences of the individuals that I was more interested in that could paint that workplace culture. The next one is personal illness, and certainly 5 years ago, if you said I suffer anxiety or depression in the workplace, it was sort of put in a box and I don't know what to do with that. What you need to be able to do is actually have this open communication in that space, and so that was contributing. So workers actually may have a decline in performance but not feel comfortable talking about perhaps what is one of the contributing factors. They're having a hard time at home, or they're suffering from, they've just been diagnosed with ASD or anxiety. But we didn't really have a culture where it was okay to talk about that. Perception-based issues is my favourite, and I've got lots of stories, but I won't go too far into them. But this is when someone actually sort of feels like it's not a rights-based dispute. So rights is your entitlement to something, your entitlement to penalty rates. That's a rights-based dispute. This is a perception, like an emotional dispute. So we had I'll never forget it, but we had one worker off work for carpal tunnel surgery. She didn't get flowers from her contact centre colleagues. However, one of those contact centre members, and it was a very public matter that popped up a few years ago, her daughter was sexually assaulted. She got, at the same time, within a month of each other, she got flowers. So this person believed that she was being excluded because she didn't get flowers. Now, as simple and as silly as that seems, in her mind, she's going to cling on to that, and everything that onflows after that is just going to keep building and building and building. So until you get to a place where you can nip that in the bud, and even if you said, well, that's just life and, suck it up, Susan. I've got to be careful not to use her name. But suck it up, Susan. She's going to ruminate, I guess, on that for a very long time, and that's exactly what happened. This person, I think in my time, had lodged at least 3 or 4 claims for different things. Carpal tunnel, throat, some really cute, strange ones. But because we didn't actually resolve what was the actual underlying concern that she had. And then, of course, that leads into conflict unresolved. So I just want to touch briefly, it's very difficult to see, but as mentioned as my intro, last year at the National Safety Council, we did take out an award for our psychosocial wellbeing program, and I can't stress the importance of getting a foundation in place first before you start to tackle. So we got the foundation right. So we spent from all the sort of 2014 to 2016 was lots of sort of groundwork, socialising of the risk, getting people to talk and understand it. Then in 2016, we actually launched our strategy, which had many, many things flowing onto it. And within 18 months, we took out that award. Now, one of those things is our, often called alternative dispute resolution, but actually called conflict resolution model. Now, this is just a snapshot of the strategy. I am always open to sharing it for those who want to see it in detail, or we often have people come into the workplace to learn about what we've done. But it touches on sort of 3 core pillars: our people and leaders, so really building them up to tackle the problems around awareness and capability, early intervention, issue management. We have to have the systems and the standards and the procedures that are right to support that. We actually have to have transparency and accountability. We actually have to talk about whether we're doing well or we're not. So we actually have a kind of call, it's our jury from a psychosocial wellbeing perspective. We have a group of workers, non-executive level, who hold the business to account for our achieving against that psychosocial wellbeing strategy. And that really, we're not very much held to account at Senate, by the way, being a government business enterprise. So we created our own little Senate committee of workers to hold us to account, and that was a really important measure. Now, why this is important is because in there, within the awareness and the capability, on each of those sort of pillars, we wanted to introduce a conflict resolution model because of the data we saw. Flick over that one. So let's have a quick look at the cycle. So how does this relate? I guess using our data, we were able to frame some of the conflict cycles that we saw and use that to socialise and generate an awareness of the need for change. So I just, really gross undersimplification, I guess, of one of the cycles, but we'd have, and we see this a lot, dispute over performance. So I didn't get my bonus, I didn't get 100% of my bonus this year. I only got 60%. Okay. Or the manager says, you're not meeting your KPIs. So I'm going to manage your performance. I'm going to have a DHA. We have, I'm never going to get it right. It's a POP first, performance objective plan maybe. That's like the informal part of what leads into a performance improvement plan. So they have a discussion with their manager. Then the manager says, yeah, well, here's where you're not meeting KPIs. Here's your role description. Here's your PDA. Manager continues to manage their performance. Next thing you know, this person's claiming that they're being bullied and harassed in the workplace. And these are all real matters that we've tackled. In fact, we still have a person off work for this second sort of 4 or 5 month period off in as much as 12 months over this exact change in management. Manager starts to manage performance, person goes off, starts crying, bullying, harassment, investigation occurs, not bullying, harassment, or it was not substantiated as such. Then we tend to just go, okay, well, case closed, back to work you go. But as I said before with my flower friend, these person then just keep ruminating on it. So when he returned to workplace about July last year, that's exactly what he did. And now he's off again for another 6 months at least, because we never resolved the fundamental conflict that must be underlying this sort of relationship between manager and worker. So we needed to get off that cycle, and the conflict resolution model designed to help people get off that cycle much earlier. So what does best practice conflict resolution look like? This isn't from me, by the way. The American Association for Conflict Resolution, there are actually 8 principles that have to be adopted in any good sort of ADR model. Voluntary, which is very interesting, and it takes a while to get people to actually go, yeah, I want to go through that process. It takes a bit of culture shifting and all change. It needs to be private and confidential. We're 650 odd staff, and stuff moves very quickly through that agency. It needs to be impartial. And you need to bring in experts who can be impartial, and I'll talk about that briefly. Those experts need to be diverse to cater for everybody that may need assistance in their sort of issue resolution. There cannot be a fear of reprisal in any way, shape or form, because a lot of the matters that present tend to be management and supervisor type matters. It's got to be consistent, of course, with bargaining agreements. It's got to preserve people's statutory rights and have fairness and natural justice. And places like Fair Work generally get assessed on that sort of right-hand side there. You know, is it accessible? Is it informal? Is it efficient? So I don't know about you, but some of our code matters tend to go forever. 9 months, I think, only to say unsubstantiated, which doesn't tend to please too many people making the allegations. So the objectives of our model, we emphasise positive relationships and communication. We focus on collaborative issue and problem solving. We want to provide a supported self-resolution model, and I'll touch on that very briefly, I'm just conscious of time. And you need to move quickly on this one. So we believe that a collaborative problem-solving approach which acknowledges that the responsibility for solving workplace conflict is actually shared between the people involved. So it means we needed to focus on building capability within that. So this is a bit of a simplification of what the model looks like. If I have a workplace concern, on the bottom, ideally we want to invest our resources in building people's capability to resolve it themselves. That requires executive commitment to be able to say it's okay to have conflict, it's healthy, it leads to innovation, but we want everyone to be skilled and able to collaboratively resolve that. That's point 1. So the bottom of the triangle, our efforts go there. But sometimes people need help, and that's why unions still exist to this day, because there are people out there that actually need assistance. Now, instead of bringing in the unions, no disrespect CPSU, but what we want is to have at our fingertips trained people that can bring the parties together so that they can work together, assisted to agree on a resolution. And we call them conflict coaches or resolution coaches, can't remember what we're going with at the moment. And of course at the top you've got the serious matters, because that still exists. But ideally what you want is at the bottom, most of the matters to be resolved between me and the person that I have a concern or issue with. So we invest in building and strengthening workplace relationships by embedding into our ongoing program, and our psychosocial wellbeing strategy is well known across the organisation. And our commitment to doing that is embedded in that, and that sort of is a commitment led from the top. To build staff's, capability in this space, we have a number of different training programs. Collaborative working relationships, and then collaborative feedback. Now that's just so staff can feel comfortable in going, you know what, I can raise this issue myself. Of course, we've got all the tools inbuilt on our intranet to assist them at the time should they need it. In the middle tier, we provide training for all our managers and supervisors. It's a very abridged version of mediation or collaborative problem solving, because we want managers to, they can see conflict soon, they can see it earlier than people in HR generally, and they can get on the coalface and resolve that. But more importantly, the supported self-resolution aspect is we actually have about 20 representatives from across the business who we've trained a little bit more intensively, so that just like your harassment contact officers, if you have them, you can go, okay, I have an issue but I don't want to talk to my manager about it, I want to bring in someone from another business unit. So we actually have people on the ground to do that, and of course we have some providers that can provide it from an external perspective. Really conscious of time. So I would love to talk more about that model. It is one of my bread and butter topics because it strongly correlates with psychosocial wellbeing in the workplace. However, I cannot. I'm limited to time. So if you're going away to your workplace and you start to actually look outside Australia, Australia relies on statute for ADR, which is absolutely fine, having worked in a lot of those statutory authorities. They're excellent, but we need to start earlier than that. So the benefits of a conflict resolution framework, it's flexible. So it can be designed by the parties to work for the parties. It reduces costs, it empowers them, and actually leads to better staff engagement because people are actually feel comfortable having discussions and coming to a sort of agreed resolution, if you like, on whether it's flowers or performance management. Focus on flowers I can never let go of. Focuses on issues and not just legal rights, whereas you tend to find that all your formal processes focus entirely on people's legal rights. Reduces lost time. It's much more time effective and far more responsive, and we've actually built in service level expectations when we are sort of facilitating that process so people know it'll be closed out in 14 days, ideally of course. And it leads to better management of work health and safety risk, which is fundamentally why I started this in the first place. So the takeaways, it does have a positive impact on the organisation from a return to work perspective. It is multifaceted, so it's like a choose your own adventure. So what does this matter to you? Where do you want to take it and how do you want to take it? It empowers and encourages self-resolution. It builds organisational and staff capability, which is transferable well and truly outside of the workplace. It's definitely best supported by a robust psychosocial wellbeing strategy as the foundation, which has to be led from the top. And it does take time, but it is absolutely worth it. Thank you.